I had done a lot of research for the Secret River that was applicable to this. The Secret River is set about 30 years later, but in order to kind of work my way into 1810, which is when the Secret River was more or less set, I felt the need to go right back to the first contacts. So I had already done a huge amount of research. I had read everything about the First Fleet that the First Fleet people left. And I had even glanced at a few works by historians. So I had done a lot of that background research, but when I came across the notebooks, that was a whole other thing. I then realised, rather to my horror, that I was going to have to come to grips with a little bit of mathematics and astronomy and all those hard things, linguistics, in order to try to get into the head of someone so different from me. And what I discovered, and I still can't, do maths or add 2 and 2, but I learned that creativity in science and mathematics is exactly of the same order. Reading books about mathematicians, it's an imaginative leap. It's not just a plod through, A plus B equals C. It's an imaginative leap. And that was brilliant. I also did a great deal of research on the ground, as I did with the Secret River. The place where the observatory is in Sydney is very interesting, and I walked there from where they put the first tents up. I walked around to where Dawes had chosen to put his observatory. And I found something very interesting. The headland goes out, and at the very end it kind of turns a slight corner away from the settlement, and that's where he put his observatory. And I thought, now, what kind of man, working backwards from landscape to character, what kind of person chooses to be out of sight of the settlement and to be isolated on this place which is quite difficult of access? And so that gave me the clue that this is a person who's quite a solitary person. He likes his own company. He likes to be on his own, and that gave me a clue as to what kind of a person he might have been. So walking around, for me, the revelations come when I'm actually walking on the place where these things happen. Sorry, that was a really long answer to your question, but it was a good question. It's where the south pylons of the Sydney Harbour Bridge now are. It's right between those two southern pylons, not where the present observatory is. The present observatory is much further up the hill. It seems to be creating a great deal of problem, the fact that I'm writing historical fiction and that I'm in many ways sticking fairly closely to the facts, but then I'm changing them as well. I mean, the easy answer is to say, this is a novel, I made it all up. Clearly that's not so. I mean, you obviously know a good bit about this and you recognise, as I intend people to. What I'm hoping, well, there are a lot of things, but I guess one of the answers is to say I'm not really... Well, first of all, in this book I have made it very clear that it is not history. Let there be no misunderstanding. I don't think that I'm writing history. I know that I'm not. So let's get that one out of the way. But I realise when those historians attacked me, I had thought long and hard about what I'm doing here. And what I realise is that, unlike them, I'm not actually all that interested in history per se. What I'm interested in, actually, is today, us, here and now. And the past gives you one more window into the present. So, in that sense, their attacks have kind of bewildered me, in a way, because I think, I'm not trying to write history. I'm actually writing about us now, because writing The Secret River alerted me to the fact that, as a descendant of, an early settler, or I suppose all of us who are newcomers to Australia, we all have to find our own accommodation with the fact that we have come here and, dispossessed the people whose land it was. And we will all arrive at a different way of coming to terms with that. And writing these books is kind of my way of doing it.
It works around the other way, because you might well say to a historian, why aren't you doing more of that imaginative insight into the characters that you're writing about?
Well, in a way, but I think in a way I like history which actually doesn't do too much of that. I do like history where I can see the footnotes and I know precisely which bits are, from the historical record and which bits are not. Some historians, modern historians, who tend to slide around a bit slipperily so that you can't quite tell where they're kind of inventing or imagining and where they're quoting, I'm really uncomfortable with that. Yeah. Most of what we know about the Gadigal language is in fact what William Dawes left. A few other people, First Fleet people, left a few other word lists, but basically what we know of Gadigal is in the 2 little blue notebooks which are now in a London museum. My decision in writing the book was not to invent any of the dialogue between Tagaran and Rook, to use only, and there's plenty there, the dialogue that was already, given to me, like a gift from the cosmos in these 2. There are linguists who have looked at the Gadigal language as much as it's possible, and it has been reconstructed. I mean, it's not spoken by anybody anymore, but it has been reconstructed to the point where the local descendants of the Gadigal people can give welcome to country and so on in Gadigal, which is pretty amazing to hear. And what they're largely drawing on is William Dawes, and that seems to me a most wonderful, shared history. They were in there together, and they've given a gift which 250 years later we can value. One of the surprises to me when I looked back through both of these books is the complexity and the variety of responses on both sides, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. That nothing is simple, that it was a matter of each individual person being flung into this situation and all of them making up a different way of behaving, and that looking back you can see that there were ways of behaving which it mightn't be realistic to hope this, but to think, in a way, the conversations that Tagaran and Rook had almost left us a model for what's possible today. At a point when I was halfway through this book, or more than halfway through it, I was in Canberra and I stood on the lawns of Parliament House when Rudd delivered his apology to the stolen generations. And I can't remember the exact metaphors he used, but I seem to remember that he talked a lot about not only turning a new page, but also opening up conversations. And I thought, isn't this amazing? We have here, in the relationship between Patjigarang and Dawes, a model that we might remember that this has happened in the past, this relationship across the cultures. It therefore might be possible again. That sounds a bit Pollyanna-ish, but, without a kind of positive model, you wonder whether it was possible. This says, yes, it is possible. It has happened. Yes, I read and absorbed The Fatal Shore, and I really admired it, and like you, read it with a kind of horrified fascination. But the books that had most influence on me was not The Fatal Shore, but a series of books written by Henry Reynolds, who has gone into the archives with the skills that only a historian can bring to the archives, and has found all the complexity and nuance and contradictions of all those times. That was really inspiring for me. It didn't have to be sensationalised as, Hughes somewhat sensationalised. It's already an amazing story, and Henry Reynolds was really dug in there and found it and brought it out for the rest of us to appreciate. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks very much.